Howdy, y'all. It's Juliet Necro, and I'm gonna get medieval on your asses. Few famous titans of the video game industry have had as tumultuous a development history as Duke Nukem. In fact, referring to the franchise as a titan of the industry in 2023 is an anachronism. A lot of that comes down to the sad story of Duke Nukem Forever. Duke Nukem Forever was first revealed to the public at E3 1998. That version of the game was running on the Quake 2 engine. Only a few months after this revelation, the team made the choice to switch over to the Unreal Engine, and then the next year to a newer version of the Unreal Engine. By the turn of the new millennium, Duke Nukem Forever was already getting clowned on for taking forever to come out, before suddenly appearing again at E3 2001 to another positive reception. All was not well behind the scenes, however, and despite how promising the 2001 version of Duke Nukem Forever was, the team wasn't able to make significant headway on the game. Eventually, and unfortunately, the rights to Duke Nukem were acquired by Gearbox Software and one Randall Pitchford in 2010, and the finished version of Duke Nukem Forever finally shipped on the 10th of June 2011. To put that in perspective, I was less than 2 years old when Duke Nukem Forever was announced at E3 1998, and I was 14 when the game finally hit shelves. The question, of course, was, is DNF 2011 a game worth waiting 12 years for? Well, full disclosure, I've never played Duke Nukem Forever, at least not the game that launched in 2011. However, the consensus on whether DNF 2011 is worth playing is a resounding no. The PC version sits at a comfortable 54 out of 100 on Metacritic, and got a 3 out of 10 from Eurogamer, a 3.5 out of 10 from GameSpot, and a 5.5 out of 10 from IGN. The desert setting kept IGN from docking points for too much water, of course. You don't have to search YouTube very far to find a lot of independent critics and writers adding gasoline to the garbage fire either. For a long time, this seemed like where the story of the Duke Nukem franchise would end. When I was a kid, I never played Duke Nukem 3D, between being a console gamer as a kid and not playing minigames outside my age bracket, so I primarily knew Duke as the star of that one game that's never gonna come out, and then when that game did drop, as the star of that one game that came out after 12 years and was disappointing. This would be his legacy. Randy Pitchford, who still owns the rights via Gearbox, will occasionally tease the return of Duke, but nothing material has come of it. But suddenly, in the year of our Lord 2022, 26 years after it started development, 24 years after it was announced, and 11 years after it released, a new chapter in the Duke Nukem Forever story began quite unexpectedly. On the 9th of May 2022, the build of Duke Nukem Forever that was used for the E3 2001 trailer leaked to the public. The Duke Nukem community jumped at the chance to see any kind of new official content for the first time in a decade. YouTubers and press outlets covered it, and in the flurry of coverage following the leak, a lot of folks noticed that while the game was extremely incomplete, it was actually pretty solid, maybe even fun at times. There were ideas here that would have killed in a 2002 or 2003 retail release if this version had made it to market. Therefore, the path forward was clear. A team of independent developers banded together and adopted the name Mighty Foot Productions, and set to work on taking the foundation of the leak and expanding it out into a full game. If Gearbox wouldn't be forthcoming with any new Duke content, then the fans would do it themselves, and give the world the return to form that Duke deserved. The DNF 2001 restoration project was born. So where was I in all of this? I watched from afar at first. Truthfully, retro first-person shooters have become one of my favorite game styles over the past 3 years. I'm honestly surprised that it's taken me this long to cover them on my channel. I first became interested in the genre after finishing Doom Eternal in March of 2020, and going back to try Classic Doom and Doom 2. From there, I moved on to the other classics of the style, along with the modern indie revivals now flooding the market. 3 of my all-time favorite games are retro FPSs, although I count Doom Eternal and Cruelty Squad as half a game each in this regard, because Doom Eternal is kind of its own thing, and Cruelty Squad is more of an immersive sim, but I digress. Despite my burgeoning appreciation of the retro FPS, I never actually got around to Duke Nukem 3D until an opportunity presented itself. I happened to be in a Discord server with someone involved with the restoration project, and seeing his enthusiasm was infectious. Eventually, he set about finding creators who would be interested in covering the restoration project when it released its first Slice demo, and I jumped at the chance to be included. Thus, here I am. Step 1, of course, was to actually play Duke Nukem 3D, to develop some appreciation for why it deserves a better follow-up than it got. My conclusion is that Duke Nukem 3D is a really good game in a lot of ways. At the time of its June 1996 release, it was one of the earliest shooters not released on the Doom engine, alongside a few games like Star Wars Dark Forces, and it's a strong showcase for what changed in the world of game engines between 1993 and 1996. Duke 3D's environments look more like real places than even the most fastidious of the maps in Doom 2. The city levels that make up the bulk of Duke episodes 1 and 3 resemble actual cities far more than, say, Map 13 of Doom 2, which you probably wouldn't realize is supposed to be a city if it wasn't titled Downtown. There's a much greater emphasis on interactivity as well. A lot of rooms in Duke 3D have light switches that you can turn on and off, or fire extinguishers that you can destroy, and oftentimes accomplishing your objectives requires making big changes to your environments, like blowing up buildings or causing a cave system to collapse. I have a few gripes with the game, like the way it essentially uses women, and particularly women in distress, as literal decorations, or everything to do with the fucking Battle Lord, but I had a lot of fun playing through it. Not quite on the level of Blood, my beloved, but very good. It's particularly interesting to contrast Duke 3D with Quake. While Duke was made in response to Doom, Quake was its own follow-up to it. Rather than going for interactivity in semi-realistic environments like 3D Realms did, id chose to retain the arcadey abstraction that Doom had to focus on greater overall graphical advancement. Duke 3D and Quake each represent a different approach on how to follow up on Doom's revolution, so it stands to reason that people would be excited to see what 3D Realms would do next. It had continued down the same road with Quake 2, so what about 3D Realms? Well, 3D Realms took so long to answer that question that it wasn't even relevant anymore by that point. But what if it had? That's the question that the 2001 Restoration Project sets out to answer. This project has occupied a sort of semantic gray area for me, and that it's ultimately built on a pre-existing game, so I should call it a mod, and yet that game's unfinished state also tempts me to call it a fan game. Lately I've been developing an interest in fan games, and particularly fan games that are answers to what-if questions. Sometimes a fan game feels like a game that came from another timeline. What if Sega had developed Sonic Triple Trouble as a 4th Genesis title? What if From Software had had the idea for Bloodborne 3 console generations early? This game similarly asks the question, what if 3D Realms had been focused and decisive enough to give Duke 3D a follow-up in a relatively timely window? All that being said, I was very excited to get the chance to cover this project. These games from another dimension are endlessly fascinating to me, and this one has the additional merit in that it's righting a wrong done to a franchise. I am humbled to be even a small part of the story of this game's coming to be. Chapter 1. Those alien bastards are gonna pay for messing up my casino. The demo begins with Duke in his dressing room, preparing to go on TV. Once again, there's a lot of interactivity available to the player, even more so than in Duke 3D. You can pick up and throw a lot of objects, and a lot of them are destructible too, which hints that we'll probably see some more involved puzzles than the game's simpler predecessor. A stagehand knocks on Duke's door, letting him know that it's time to go on for his late-night TV interview. The page walks down the hallway quite slowly, giving you plenty of time to get your bearings with the movement and controls and explore the environment a bit. You can talk to the various people backstage and even pick up a few dollars that will be useful later. It's not quite as extravagant, but the way that this game opens reminds me a lot of the opening of the original Half-Life. Half-Life also has a slow beginning that allows you to get your bearings, talk to people, and explore your surroundings before the action actually begins. Duke is no Gordon Freeman, though, so he doesn't have to wait nearly as long for violence to happen. On the TV show, we're introduced to our premise and the rivalry between Duke Nukem and the President. This is also a good time to mention that for this project, Duke Nukem is voiced by Johnny Matragrano as opposed to John St. John. If your Twitter feed and YouTube subscription box are anything like mine, you've almost certainly seen a meme given a voice by Johnny. He plays Duke often in memes, but his take on the character feels a little bit different here. It feels like he's changed something with the inflection to better match the original performance. It could also just be because when he records a meme with Duke, he usually puts the audio through a bit crusher to sound like the audio in Duke 3D. Or it could even be my imagination. Whatever it is, I think it's his best performance as Duke so far.
No, Jay, those alien bastards only listen to the language of hot lead.
While Duke's getting interviewed by the well-named Jay Lenoman, an explosion rocks Duke's new casino, the Lady Killer. And just in time for the grand opening, too. Aw, man. Duke takes the elevator up to his penthouse to see what's going on. Here we're introduced to more ways of interacting with the world than in previous Duke games. For example, there's an automatic door here that's stuck, so Duke can mighty foot the glass in order to enter the security office and turn on the sprinkler system. In addition, there's also this little hacking minigame, which you interact with using the mouse to represent Duke's finger, a system that was later used in Doom 3. In the very next room, we get our first little tease of combat. The new alien invaders are a bunch of John Carpenter's The Things, or at least resemble them. They have thing-like qualities. A lot of the enemies in this demo are humans possessed by these creatures, who'll shamble towards you like zombies and hit you with their tentacles if they get close. They're not too difficult to dispatch. Although I will say that my least favorite thing about this game so far is how severely getting hit by a melee attack jostles your view. It makes it really difficult to get your bearings again after taking a hit. If it were up to me, I would make the slash decal a little less opaque and reduce the view bob on hit a bit. Just spitballing though. I love some of the detail on display here, like the fact that there's a sound effect for walking over broken glass, or the paintings in Duke's apartment all being famous Renaissance paintings with Duke's face painted over the original subject. You can also now loot money from corpses that will come in handy later, because this game has functioning vending machines that you can use to restore your health. There's a few more rooms that require interacting with objects to progress. You have to close Duke's oven, which is on fire, to get to a dumbwaiter that will take you upstairs. This is a cool evolution of the stuff that was present in Duke 3D. In that game and the other build games, you could turn on light switches and open oven doors and things like that, but there often wasn't really a reason to do so unless it was to activate a secret or find a key or something like that. Here it's more necessary to progress, and it's pretty fun and interesting. Unfortunately, this runs into the issue that I am very bad at video game puzzles and figuring out where to go in games of this type. But oh well, I managed alright. Duke manages to gain entry to his bedroom, where one of the maids hands him his first weapon, a golden desert eagle. She tries to make a run for it, but gets gunned down by a helicopter gunship. This kind of scripted sequence, that doesn't rip the player out of gameplay, is another sign that this game is decidedly post-Half-Life. No scene this complex really happens in Duke 3D. It's also interesting to note that this scene was already in the leak. Scenes like this were part of this game's DNA from the beginning. Anyway, in Duke's pool, we get our first taste of the shooting in this game, as some possessed members of the EDF open fire on Duke. And my god, do they ever open fire. The hit-scanning enemies in this game are really, really aggressive, which I believe that the developers are planning on adjusting in the next patch. As of right now, though, it gives me Blood Episode 1 vibes, minus the yelling cult members and the dynamite bundles. If you try this demo for yourself, I recommend trying it once on Let's Rock before going back through on Come Get Some. I played it on the higher difficulty first, and it was pretty rough until I got used to it. Duke's study is cut off, so he goes across the roof and through the ductwork to reach it and get to his bunker. When going into Duke's study, there's a couple of things to note. First of all, when Duke arrives, his phone is ringing. A female voice tells him to get out of Vegas and head to Slick Willie's, and that he can't trust anyone. Presumably, this is Bombshell, the character that would gradually morph into Shelley Harrison from Ion Fury. Here's something else that you wouldn't see back in Duke Nukem 3D. As I said earlier, the gender politics of Duke 3D are obviously not great. Women exist in that game as accessories to Duke and the world he inhabits, so to be introduced to a female character here who actually has agency and a significant role in the story is really cool and a sign of maturity that Duke Nukem Forever 2011 wound up lacking. The second is the entrance to Duke's bunker. It's protected by a 4-digit combination, which Duke has to check his email to discover. Here's another example of the greater level of interactivity on display. Having to check the email to find the code is almost immersive sim-esque. It's pretty fun. At this point, Duke retrieves his shotgun behind a glass panel labeled, "In case of alien invasion, break glass." I suppose that this is as good a time as any to talk about the arsenal available in this demo. You start, of course, with Duke's mighty foot. It's slower than it was in Duke Nukem 3D, which makes sense considering its comical speed in that game. In a nice bit of polish, there's a bespoke animation for mighty footing the floor where Duke grinds his boot into the ground. Your first firearm is the aforementioned Desert Eagle. It's alright. I like the handgun from Duke Nukem 3D better. This one feels slow and inaccurate by comparison, but it's a fine holdover until you obtain the M16. This game's rifle is pretty satisfying to use. It looks and sounds great, and it makes pretty quick work of most of the regular enemies. It also has a mounted grenade launcher, which I love. Next up is the shotgun, which is probably my favorite of the three. It's very punchy and satisfying, just like its big sibling in Duke 3D. As a connoisseur of video game shotguns, I rate this one pretty high. There are also pipe bombs making a return from Duke 3D, although they're somewhat rare, at least in the demo. They're really useful in this game, since it has more scripted sequences. If you know when enemies are about to show up, or can predict it, you can set traps with these bombs pretty effectively. The Duke Nukem 3D RPG makes a return later on. The projectile is a little slow, but it does great damage once it hits. I suppose it's kind of a trade-off. Lastly, there's a new laser railgun weapon. It looks to be your long-range option. If you're playing on Come Get Some, the possessed EDF will snipe you with these, then that's pretty nasty. I'm excited to see some scenarios in the full release when Duke can turn the tables instead. From here, we proceed further through the ruined casino, fighting our way through the burning hotel level. Here the power is failing, and this game actually shows its hand at being a pretty effective horror experience when it wants to. This floor is very dark and full of possessed humans and small bug-like creatures. There's one room in particular, where you have to track the movement of the insects by the overhead light, which flickers unreliably. It's way spookier than anything you'd find in Doom 3 next year. Yeah, I said it. Doom 3 is supposed to be the horror one, and yet the scariest thing it ever does is spawn a monster or open a monster closet behind you. This little sequence is a much more creative kind of spook. Well done. It's also at this point that the game calls attention to the fact that you can press the 7 key to bring up some mission objectives. This demo is fairly linear, but this tells me that we'll likely see more involved and varied objectives in future demos and the eventual release. I'm very excited for that. Once you get the elevators working again, you can head down to the casino floor for the finale of the demo. Here there are several different set pieces, including a large wave pool and a fight through the burning casino floor. This is where the demo gets seriously tough on Come Get Some. The adjustment to enemy aggression can't come soon enough. At the conclusion of this section, you encounter the robot enemy you can see in the trailer, which is totally not the Terminator from the hit film The Terminator. This guy is really, really tough. I eventually resorted to just running past him through the loading zone into the next map. Last up is the Lady Killer's Buffet restaurant, which is charmingly called the Come Get Some Buffet. There's a lot of crawling around in the service areas behind the buffet. Sneaking around the industrial sections behind the front-facing parts of the casino is another thing that gives me Half-Life vibes, especially when you have to swim through the shark-infested aquarium to advance. After an ambush by some pig cops, you make your way out of the casino, ending the demo. On the whole, this demo is a ton of fun. Barring those few gameplay adjustments that I mentioned, the foundation is incredibly solid, and the section that the team has worked on feels pretty close to being a finished game. If this game had dropped in 2003, which is the supposition that the team is working with, it would probably be well regarded today. I am very excited to continue following the development of this game and to play the full game when it launches. Chapter 2. I'm here to kick ass and finish leaked games, and I'm all out of ass. I'm not sure if I've ever heard of a project quite like this. I've seen quite a few fan games, fan remasters, and fan remakes, but I'm not sure if I've ever seen fans set out to finish an unreleased game. The closest thing I can think of is the mod for Knights of the Old Republic 2 that patches in all of the content on the disc that was left behind when the game got pushed out the door before it was ready. Of course, the difference is that Knights of the Old Republic 2 got a commercial release, while Duke Nukem Forever 2001 did not. Coincidentally, while I was gathering footage for this video, we got a lot of other video game leaks. For example, someone leaked the very early 1996 version of Duke Nukem Forever, back when it was still going to be a 2D platformer. There was also a leak of Duke Nukem 3D Reloaded, a cancelled Unreal 3 remake of Duke Nukem 3D. Lastly, on the Duke Nukem front, there was even a leak of the script for a proposed Duke Nukem movie from 2010. My takeaway from that script is that it would have been trash on an unprecedented scale, and we should be glad that that movie never saw the light of day. The 1995 prototype version of Prey leaked. The alpha version of Doom 64 leaked. It's been an unprecedented period of time for this kind of stuff. First of all, these leaks are fantastic development. The unfortunate thing about being into video games is that they are held onto strongly by those that own the intellectual property. There are a lot of games that are not legally sold anywhere that the owner of the IP will still come down on you for downloading. A good portion of Nintendo's catalog is unavailable as they continue to put games even God has never heard of on Nintendo Switch Online, for example. There's no way to legally play Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door or Fire Emblem Path of Radiance that would make Nintendo any money. It would be one thing if downloading these games would lose Nintendo sales, but it literally does not. If I were to buy a GameCube and a copy of Path of Radiance off of eBay, it would probably cost me at least 200 euros, and 0 of those euros would find their way into Nintendo's coffers. And yet, they'll take down sites for sharing ROMs, arguing that it's hurting their sales, or even that downloading ROMs is ontologically bad. If it's so bad, Nintendo, then sell us the games. You're wasting free money by not putting the HD versions of Twilight Princess and Wind Waker that you already have on Switch cartridges. That's not to mention the many smaller IPs that have been rapidly swallowed up in the recent trend towards monopoly in the game industry. Sometimes I wonder if Warner Brothers is even aware that they own the Blood franchise, for example. So yes, leaks are good. They have a democratizing effect. They're fascinating curios, if nothing else, but they're also useful. They let newer game developers learn how the games that inspired them came together. This stuff was all just sitting around on some hard drive anyway. It's not like anyone was using it. So why not put it out into the world and see what comes of it? It's certainly not going to damage the reputation of the Duke Nukem IP any more than Duke Nukem Forever 2011 already did. Duke Nukem fans especially have a right to revel in all of the leaks that have come out lately, starved of content as they are. Randy Pitchford claims that he owes his career to Duke Nukem, but the way he's treated the franchise since acquiring the rights to it doesn't seem to show very much reverence. Since releasing DNF 2011, there's been a remaster of Duke Nukem 3D that's not even the best way to play the game, and a bunch of cancelled projects, and that's it. That's why the restoration project is such a triumph in the making. In a small way, this is the fans taking history into their own hands and giving themselves the sequel to Duke Nukem 3D that they should have gotten if the IP hadn't been mishandled for decades. In that regard, this demo is very, very promising, on top of being a ton of fun. As far as I'm concerned, the rule with intellectual property should be use it or lose it. A lot of old games are now sold via publishers that had no hand in their creation, and if that's not rent-seeking, I don't know what is. I'm all for more developers getting a chance at the reins of their treasured franchises, even if it's in an unofficial capacity. I hope someday to return to Duke Nukem Forever 2001, once the full release is here. Always, always, always bet on Duke. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe, and I'll be back with the next video in February. Till next time, ciao. It's time. No one can do this. No one can do it. It's... It's it's time to it's time to kick gum and chew ass, and I'm all out of ass. Fucking dick kick 'em.